So, stuck to my shoe. Right. So just take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. Eyes open or closed at the start, depending on what works for you best. But what we want to try and do is to sort of start with an awareness within the body, in the movement, posture, so on and so forth, and gradually extend out. So I generally sort of I'm inclined to close my eyes a little bit more at the start, just to give me a chance to direct my attention more easily. And just thinking about the basics of our posture. Weight a little bit forwards in our feet. If I exaggerate. Forwards, here I feel the pressure in the balls of my feet. Just easing back, so that settles me down, brings me more to the upright position. And at the same time, starts this process of just getting a sense of dropping downwards, of acknowledging that downward movement of gravity in your body, not straining against it. Just trying to release a little bit in those areas where you feel there's a sort of conflict here, I suppose you could call it, so that gradually you get this feeling of dropping. Different ways of viewing it, you might just feel that your feet are sinking into the ground. So your pelvis is hanging from the spine, or as though the whole of the torso were dropping down between your legs. Another aspect of it is in the hips, lower back, buttocks, which are just overhanging slightly. It's not here where there's a direct physical support for them, but one that is likely to stiffen up the knees, but rather here. And obviously that's going to make the thigh muscles work that bit harder. You're suspended now from the muscles, I suppose, primarily, tendon, ligament, fascia, also supporting the structure of your skeleton, but without stiffening up, without straining. Suspended between heaven and earth. So I've never actually been bungee jumping or parachuting, but I can imagine that the harness that they put you in for those activities can have a similar feel of supporting you. Or sometimes I have an image of a baby in a baby bouncer. I don't know if they still use them, but supported. Another image, of course, is that we're in water, and that the water itself supports us, which is perhaps a more accessible image for some people. Whichever image works for you, whichever you're landing on at the moment, don't get so caught up in it that you're trying to match the image. They're only useful in as far as they offer something to you relatively straightforwardly. And sometimes they can feel as though they contradict each other, but they're just different views of the same process. Our center of gravity dropping, the rooting down, releasing of tightness in the whole of our body, particularly the middle part of the body, so that we're able to turn from there. That turning movement will have an effect on the legs, but more noticeable up through your ribs, your shoulders, into your arms feeling quite heavy. And if you're using this image of moving through water, there is also an external resistance to the movement that encourages your body to connect up and encourages a stronger feeling developing through the whole of your body. Stronger certainly in the physical aspect of your body, muscle, tendon, so on. There's always a conditioning element, but stronger also in the quality of the movement. So an interesting way of looking at this is that we make a transition from a very loose movement. I turn my hands, just flop around. They will tend to land in the same place each time because they're the same length. So it's a fairly predictable pattern. It's a very loose, floppy feeling. Whereas the feeling, if we can apply that image of being in water, as I said, is much more connected and somehow denser. So in my mind, I sometimes feel it as a transition from the feeling you might get with a very light breeze on your skin, just brushing over your skin, and water just flowing over your skin. There's a slightly more connected quality there. It's hard to find the words to describe it. And I think that's one of the more significant developments that we go through in Tai Chi. It's not really a linear thing. I think we sometimes, we get glimpses of it. Maybe particular exercises help with that as well. Maybe a particular image. Sometimes we can find ourselves not understanding something, and then suddenly a particular image will be like a light bulb, like nothing. Suddenly your body will respond to it. And raising your arms. There's nothing unique about this for Tai Chi. This way that our body responds to images. It's just that normally it's not something that is directly in our awareness. But we do respond to images all the time. Our world is full of it. Everything from advertising billboards through to the warning signs on roads, and just everywhere we find imagery used to stimulate a particular response. Take a step forward. Notice that when I've done this, I haven't narrowed the step. So from here, I imagine parallel lines going through my feet. And I step on those lines. We sometimes refer to them as tram lines. So now, still turning in the middle of your body, but another way of viewing this would be to apply, think about a little bit of pressure here. You can see my back leg, see the knees bent. If I straighten it a little bit, not lock it back, but straighten it a little bit, that pushes me up. And I just direct it forwards, and then the same thing in the front leg. So that's a useful way to start thinking of this, that your leg is moving you, if you like. Your legs are moving, your upper body just sitting on your hips. You could also think about what's happening in the middle of your body. I'm in the back leg here, and I've turned in the direction of the back leg. When I turn to the front, even without moving my weight, I can feel a stronger feeling here. Just like I kind of get drawn into the front leg. I could focus on the sinking. When I go into my back leg, this happens. I feel myself dropping down more. Maybe without an extra bend in the knee. It's more of a feeling within my body, and that produces again that bounce up. So different ways of viewing this movement. Change over now, the other foot forwards. And depending on the exercise or that we're doing, you may find that one way of viewing it works better than another. Obviously, for quite a lot of the movements in the parallel stance, movement in the center of your body is key. But when I use the term center, I sometimes refer to the actual physical center of the body between hips and waist, that kind of area. But sometimes it's more like a kind of concept that the center is represented by the whole of the body from the waist down to the ground. Again, depending on exactly what I'm trying to achieve or the movement itself. Just shake out. So if I'm trying to say, for instance, get a feeling of being centered, if my thoughts are all over the place and I can't quite focus, actually it's quite useful to focus on my feet, because they're the direct contact with ground, literally grounding ourselves. We get a sense of the hips being drawn down, you know, weight goes forwards, hips go back. If I'm trying to work out how an arm repeats a pattern, then if it's an exercise that involves moving the weight, I might focus on that first of all and relate that to the turning in the center. If it's a movement where the weight doesn't significantly move, then I might focus more on the center. The center's turning this way, the center's turning that way, and so on and so forth. So these things aren't set, but as a general principle, I would say more and more as we develop in Tai Chi, we feel the movement from inside out, from the center outwards, upwards, downwards, sideways, whatever. So returning to the parallel posture and just thinking about this mechanism that is connected with the rooting down. As I stand here, there is a pull all the way through my body, but because it's the rear of the body here by the hips overhanging, as I described before, that's a good place to focus, and just soften your knees and allow that sinking down. And at a given point, there'll be a resistance in your legs. Try not to do this, having your knees too far forwards. So it's definitely a backward movement with the hips, and just gradually letting your legs push you back up to this first position. Don't come up like that. You see, as soon as I do that, my posture changes. Sinking down and pushing up. Pay attention to the sensations in your hips and lower back and the buttocks and knees as you go down, because that's the feeling that you want to try and maintain throughout the session, whether or not there's a visible and active dropping back of your hips. There is still going to be that downward energy moving through your body. There's still going to be the upward energy that comes out of that. Sinking down, maybe every now and then, and this is quite interesting, you may get a sort of sudden sense of dropping. It's like you've been walking along with a bag over your shoulder. You put it down and suddenly, oh, I didn't realize it was so heavy. Or if you've ever dug in a garden where there's a lot of rocks and so on and so forth, you're trying to push the fork in or whatever you're digging with, and it's stopping, and every now and then it goes through. It doesn't happen every time, but gradually we feel that we're able to go down more effectively, more completely, more comfortably. Now bring your hands around in front of you, and with that upward movement, feeling the expansion up through belly in particular, pushing your hands up and then lowering down. So feeling the connections again now from feet to hips, hips to shoulders, from your shoulders out through your elbows to your wrists, finally to your fingers. Try and let your body settle into a nice steady rhythm. Try and just listen to your body. Be aware of the sensations of movement. Feel which ones are regular. More likely to be connected with a specific movement, but there will be other sensations as well. Sometimes that feeling of release. You may notice areas of stiffness and tightness that hopefully will begin to just ease as we go through the session. It can be useful to focus on specific parts of the body. I think sometimes the spine for me is a good place to focus, with that feeling of a movement up vertebra by vertebra up into my neck, into the crown of my head. And then change into the wild goose. Like a bird in flight. Feeling the expansion go up a little bit higher. Really, the expansion is all the way through your body, of course, but the emphasis now lifts up a little bit more. The image of the bird in flight is an interesting one. Next time you come across a feather on the ground, especially if you can find a big one, lift it up and just wave it up and down in the air. And that will give you a good impression of the sort of feeling that we're looking for in our arm, that slight curvature, that slight bend, but connected and quite strong, of course. And then change into part in the clouds. Now this, for the most part, is edge on. So if you have that feather in your hand, try just moving it up and down in the air edgeways, and you'll find that friction is much reduced. And with this one, we feel the expansion starting in the feet as always, but belly, solar plexus, and then into the upper part of the chest. Aware also of this sense of just reaching out. How far can we go out without losing the softness in our body? I'm far up to about here, but if I do this, I can now feel the top of my back is just straining a little bit. So I don't want to push that. I want to keep this feeling of softness, of spaciousness within my body to allow for the movement. One more time, part in the clouds. Now, trying to keep the rhythm expanding, pushing up on one side. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky and contract. On the other side. So still pushing up a little bit from the ground, still sinking down at the moment. You can also try now or in your own time, making that visible movement up and down in your hips, smaller and smaller. But trying to just retain an awareness of that feeling of downward movement and upward movement, the pull of gravity, your body's response, so that eventually you're not actually physically moving up and down. You've still got this feeling of overhanging. This is as high as you would ever want to go in these exercises. There's that slight curve in your knees. If you've lost that feeling of movement within the body, go back to the more obvious movement. Remind yourself of how that feels, and then you can go through the same process again. So again, slightly more internalized focus, not so dependent on the actual physical movement. But remember, you know, it's the movement that you see, that you copy, that leads you into that inner awareness. Now, pushing in 4 directions. Now you do just stay with the hips dropping back, they don't go down any lower. So at this stage, quite a nice feeling in your back, so the movement upwards with your arms has caused a lengthening, sinking down likewise, and then just drawing down. Push out, and this is where we really focus on the center of the body, the physical center, hips and waist, and I turn. Turn back, bringing my hands in, and then in the other direction, hands going straight out from your shoulders and back, finishing with just a forward-facing movement, pushing out to the sides. Make sure you give yourself time to come back. We often speed up in that stage. So if anything, put the emphasis on slowing down in the returning stage. But you could, if it suits you to do this, do it as a count. You could count yourself, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Again, it depends what suits you. What we're trying to avoid is something it's quite common in this exercise and in others, which is we take quite a while, pay a lot of attention to this, and then suddenly it's not down there, or sometimes we find ourselves trying to go from here to here, and so on and so forth. We're always coming back. And it's not a bad focus, not a bad idea, a bad rhythm, way of just viewing the world to get into. That you will always give yourself that time and space just to recenter yourself. One more round. Remember, hips dropping back. Now, your hands drop down, changing the expansion now, pushing one arm out sideways, fingers pulled back a little bit. So you could imagine standing sort of beneath an arch of some kind, the kind of archway you'd get in an old church door or something like that, just gently pressing outwards through the palm of your hand so that you can feel your hand sliding around, but not so much pressure that you're sort of stuck there. Just touching, sliding around the surface. And once again, and only if it's comfortable, it's quite a strong movement. Once your hand gets to here, you turn. Good, and then change sides. Again, if it's comfortable, add in the turn. So the rhythm of the movement remains all the way through all of the exercises. There's an expanding stage, which we could designate as yang, a contracting stage, yin. And in most of these exercises, they should be evenly balanced. Now, sinking down and pushing up again. As we do this, the pelvis pretty much stays level. And it's worth just reminding ourselves of the importance of this physical center of the body for our posture, as well as for our movement. That when the hips are dropping back, that would tend to bring us more to an upright position. But this time, when my hips get pushed back, they go even further and the pelvis tilts. Notice how my head goes forwards and then dropping back down and pushing up. And here, see, it's really a movement backwards here. You feel a lengthening through your back, particularly the lower part of your back. So go nice and easy. And then going into rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, pushing up and following the shoulders up, and as the shoulders go forwards, swinging your hands over. So not leading with your hands from here, hips go back, shoulders go forward, hands are drawn over. And your back should stay reasonably straight, not rigid. And you see there's a slight curve there, but by reasonably straight, I suppose I'm really talking about an imaginary line going down from the crown of my head. The body itself is curved, but actually I don't want to do that. I don't want to let the head droop. So although there's a strong downward movement, a key element here is a forward movement. So it's like there's something over there that I want to reach for. So on the table, I'm doing this to reach for it. And then this time, we're continuing with the table theme, polishing the table, turning first of all, and then pushing your hips back, and then swinging the hips around and back. So it's very much a movement here. Notice where my hips go. I'm exaggerating a little bit, so I'm probably pulling my knees out of line there, and then I come back up. And then the first thing I do, I turn, push back, swing my hips around, and my hips drop back and come back to the front. The arms, again, shadowing that movement. One more time. And let your hand rest. So the circular movements are very characteristic of Tai Chi and Qigong. And particularly the Qigong that I tend to focus on mostly, which are at the sort of Tai Chi end of the spectrum. I had one teacher, a Chinese teacher, who had in his younger days been taught by his dad all the sort of Shaolin forms and things like that. And I always remember he didn't really speak English. I spoke even less Mandarin, to my shame. But one of the things he often said was sort of Kung Fu, he'd say. Kung Fu, meaning the Shaolin, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, Tai Chi. In other words, the Shaolin, sometimes referred to external arts, as external arts, tended to use the straight line, whereas Tai Chi and other internal arts make use of the circular pattern. It's not that we don't have the straight lines. It's just that the curve is more obvious. I don't think the distinction between different types of art and that is nearly as set as many people seem to believe, but it's worth bearing that in mind. Now put one foot forwards again, and this time just focusing on the weight change, transfer from one foot to another. If you have an idea about where your weight should be settling, then try and make that your target point. If that doesn't make sense to you, then just be aware you don't want your weight to be beyond the ball of your foot. If I go forwards here, my weight should resting just behind the ball of my foot. I feel the ball of my foot being pushed into the ground. If I start to go further, see how my knees now starting to overextend. By the time I get there, I'm in danger, not just of stumbling forward, but of actually straining my knee. So the weight transfer, again, we can think of it in all those different ways that I was talking about before. Ideally, we have a sense of all of those factors. They all feed into a kind of central idea, which is really that what we want to be able to do is to transfer the weight of the body without losing that connection to the ground. So again, if I come closer, if I start to go back, and what I want to do is take a direct line back to my rear foot and then forwards to my front foot. If that's the line, if I veer off that line, then I'm more likely to be able to stumble around. Because obviously there's my leg for the weight to go into. Back there though, somewhere like that, or over there is no physical support there. Initially, very much a case of your legs doing the work. Your upper body just sitting quietly on your hips, resting there, much as if you were actually, if you're on a bicycle and you're just sitting on the bike, you just maybe move it to and forwards a little bit. You'll be letting the bike take your weight. So this is where the push image is quite a useful one. But you want to try and build on that, because we don't want to separate out different parts of the body. And if you ride a bike, then you'll be well aware that as soon as you start pedaling, you meet a certain resistance in the air around you. And if your upper body did nothing to resist that, you just get pushed off the bike. And in the same way, if we imagine being in water, then if I was in water up to shoulder height and I moved my weight forwards into the front foot and did nothing with the upper part of the body, I would get pushed back by the pressure of the water. So as we go through, there's a change that we feel in the front of the body and then in the back of the body. Kind of, again, difficult to describe, but I would describe it as a denser feeling. But you might come up with something more appropriate for you. But it's very fluid. So again, we become aware of what we might think of as an internal mechanism, not the push from the foot or something like that. But actually, if you could imagine this water bottle, if I could find a way to pump all the water up to that end, like that, say, then it would do that. And then from there, if I could find a way to pump the water back up to that end, it would do that. So rather than me standing there and having to go, right, I'm going to tip the bottle like this, I'm just supporting the bottle and it's doing this because of that pumping mechanism. And in the same way, we begin to use our intent to imagine the change in the feeling once we've started to recognize it. And again, we start to get a sense of something happening more deeply within the body. This is a good exercise to focus on that process. When we get to the movements with the arms, it would be too confusing to have to think about that a lot. Now, as you go back, you can raise your front toes, and then when you're in the front foot, let the back knee bend, the heel come up. So you're gradually getting more of the weight going down through your foot. Until you're just able to bring your foot in, push back. When you step out, make sure that you step out to the correct place. But there again, the idea of a circular movement is useful because your foot comes in and then it goes out to the side. And this makes a little curve in movement, which if you think about it is quite natural. Because here, your foot's going to be pulled in, unless you're doing something to stop that. And then you can just swing it out again, likewise here. So on the other side, just play around with those various ideas. Find the ones that are working for you at the moment. Don't just reject the other ones, but don't feel that you have to sort of pick it all up. I sometimes find myself just scribbling away ideas, like I've just received a letter and think, well, it's a letter from the bank, I don't want to deal with it today. I'll put it there and I'll come back to it tomorrow or something like that when I'm better able to deal with it. And again, think about maybe the push from the leg or the expansion from the center, the ball bouncing down, the movement within the body, if you can get a sense for that. Raising your toes and your hips. Take your time. Give yourself a chance to settle. Chances are in the transition, you may be a little bit out or something like that. Just settle down, and then you're in a much better position to move your foot. What you may find, of course, is that in the process of moving your foot, this happens, angled slightly, in which case, put the toes down, settle yourself down. Don't expect to always get this perfect. Aim to get it perfect. When it doesn't come out correctly, take the time to correct it, and you'll find that more and more you're going straight into the correct posture. But since a lot of that relies on your awareness, that can be very variable. If you're a bit sleepy, had a busy weekend, or some reason are quite distracted, then don't expect to necessarily be able to do this as well as on a day when you're really focused and so on. And then this time, just let the swinging of your leg continue. Again, this time it makes a semicircular movement. So you bring your foot in, you push forwards, you feel out. It's like you're walking in long grass and you don't really know what's going to be under your foot. So you're just pushing through, and then you put the foot down, then lower the toes. And then stepping back. Same thing, feeling back. Imagine you're in a dark room and you know that there's sort of things on the floor. You've got to go backwards. So you just, are you about to step on a drawing pin or a book or whatever might be on the floor? And shake out. So those ideas and so on, the principles, the ones that work for us, are ones that we want to try and integrate into the movement as a whole. As always, when we begin to move our arms, it's a little bit more complicated, less obvious, because there's more going on. So we will rely on that background awareness to feed into the actual movement. Have your right foot forwards. Let's start with the exercise, pigeon spreads its wings. Hold your hands over your belly, moving your weight forwards and backwards, feeling the movement from the leg, almost like a wave, pushing up through your body. And that wave is going to push your hands forwards. It's going to push your elbows out. I'm exaggerating again, but the hands come forwards, the elbows go out, and eventually your hands are just separated. So don't think about lifting your hands. Think about that movement, pushing behind your arms. Creating the movement very much like if you're in the sea, you're standing there and your arms are floating on the surface of the sea, and a wave comes in, that sort of surge that comes up underneath your arm, indeed your whole body, is similar to the feeling that we're looking for. So a good image to bring into this particular movement might be that one of sort of that fluid movement from front to back in the upper part of your body. One more time. Sink back. Let your hands just drop down next to your hips. Turn them palm back, go forwards, drawing your arms through. This time, rather than pushing your arms forwards, pulling them back, you're pulling them forwards and backwards. And they will swing out in those moments of settling into your leg, especially the forward movement. So all the time your hips are actively moving forwards or backwards, your arms are trailing behind because your hips are moving your shoulders, and the shoulders are pulling on your arms. One more time. And then same feeling, pushing and pulling, but more focused, more directed, pushing wave or pushing a boat. Good. Okay, now change over. Pigeon spreads its wings. Always aware of that downward pull. Remember, once we've got our hips sinking back a little bit, we're yielding to it. So we don't necessarily have to drop the hips lower or push them up. As we discovered earlier, that can be part of it, that may be a part of it. But as long as we're not actively resisting the pull of gravity, there will be a downward movement. And as long as we're not just collapsing to the ground, there will be some kind of responsive upward movement, upward energy moving through our body. And then fisherman cast the net. One more time. Pushing away or pushing away. Once again, we don't need to think about lifting our arms. The very fact that they're being pushed away from our body means that sooner or later they're going to rise up. The shape of the arm here. You see, curving the elbow contributes to that. One more time. And shake out. So when we come to wind blows the willows, so I go back here, I turn, I'm sinking down in this back leg. So it's safe to assume there's an upward movement that pushes my arms away from my body. And again, they will swing up. I go forward, I make sure that I settle into the front leg and I feel the push up, pushing my arms away, and they swing up, which is a very different view of this exercise to one that says, I've got to go here and lift my arms up. You actually go forward, say, go into the foot, you sink down, you feel the push up, and you give it a direction by turning in that physical center of your body. But the expansion is what moves your arms for you. So have your right foot forwards. Start on your back foot, sink down and turn. This way, we maybe not get quite as much of a lift in our arms, but it's much smoother for our body, less strain on our shoulders, and it's less likely to make us top heavy. Which is useful if you want to do the next stage of this exercise. You can bring the front foot in just as before, and this time just raise it up instead. Same thing with the back foot. You notice my front foot's turned out. You bring the foot in, you can either just put the foot down there, that's fine, and turn, or you can lift the foot up, that's fine too. Or this is a bit stronger, so be careful. You raise the foot and rotate your hip at the same time. Whichever's easier for you. To begin with, you can got plenty of time to build into the full movement. This is the transition from wind blows the willows to dragonfly skims the water. But do take it in stages. And shake out. Once again, we're inclined to leap ahead. You remember when we were doing this, I said we sort of speed up in that bit. So there's this kind of strange psychology there. And I've seen many times people, right from this exercise, they'll do this well, and then I'll build in the raise of the toes and finally the stepping in and going through each stage very carefully, and they can do it. And then we change over and they're doing this already. They've shot ahead. Feel each stage of the process. So if you're doing the stepping, you come in and think there, oh yeah, now you can feel the sinking down. Now you can feel the expansion. Once you've got that, say, oh, well, actually, maybe I can just raise the foot as well. Once you've got that, not only can you raise the foot, except I can't, you raise the foot and then you rotate as well. So, do it in stages. Be comfortable with each stage before you move on. So starting the back foot and turning, wind blows the willows. This is not a race or competition. And I find there's often a value, particularly when I'm teaching. When I'm teaching, I have to do it very systematically, teach it stage by stage. And I often realize that I don't practice that stage enough. I go straight into the full movement and I'm missing things. So don't be in a hurry. Don't get caught up in, I must do this, I must achieve this. So stepping in. It's quite interesting, are you stiffening in your hip above the foot that is doing the stepping? If so, why? You know, we don't need to do that. You can raise the foot. Are you losing your posture when you do that? Can you, at that point, then just make that simple rotation? Or is that somehow twisting you up? You have a little wobble, can you recover from that? Can you get to it? So, oh, that's not working. Can I come back to it? That's quite a valuable lesson, I think. And this time, stepping through, this is dragonfly skims the water. One more time in this direction. Going back. And shake out. When I was learning this, sometimes I'm still learning it, of course, but you know, kind of when I first encountered it, I was doing things like this. I was using the wall for support and thinking, well, what is this movement? You know, how does that work? I can have my hands on the wall, and it means now I can think about that. Oh yeah, that there's that as well, and so on and so forth. So you know, sometimes it's useful to break the movements down to the component parts, just focus on a particular component, because then you don't have to bother about, am I going to fall over or something like that. Dragonfly skims the water. Lovely. So now just rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. The arm. The other side. And your back. And your hips. Light on your belly. And the upper part. Right. Just a reminder that there will be no class next Monday, being the bank holiday, but we'll be here on Thursday. So if you're about then, it'd be good to see you. Come back to the standing. We capture some of this initial feeling again, sinking down. And we have embraced tiger, return to the mountain. Pushing out. This time, the focus of attention very much on that drawing in, coming back to your root, coming back to that feeling of being centered, being stable, whatever you associate with this exercise and the idea of the mountain as a way of settling, quietening, stilling to round off the session. One more time. And shake out. Thank you very much. That always goes so quickly, doesn't it, when we do that?